I would like to introduce you to our today's presenter, Roger Goodman. Roger is a superb exponent of the art of facilitated and accelerated learning, including all aspects of project management, and he specialized also in the preparation for the PMI's PMP certification, as well as for postgraduate diploma in project management as well. Roger, you can please go ahead and introduce yourself to our participants here today for joining the session and take over the presentation from there.
Yeah, Ali, thank you so much. It's great to be with you again. And Rafi and Divya, welcome. It seems as though we are together now. We are just going through the 23 hours of our first lockdown, as I guess things are happening in India at about the same time. So everybody's working from home. As Piali said, I've been working with Knowledge Hub for a number of years, and the last couple of years I've been training people in project management around the Pacific Islands in a program called Pacific Climate Ready. It's been fascinating to meet people who are being affected by climate change. So projects more and more are becoming part of our general economy and the way in which things are happening. And honestly, with what's happening with COVID-19, there's major disruptions and thousands upon thousands of new projects underway as we are witnessing at the moment. So I guess you're all being affected as well by these things. But on that moment, let's dive into the presentation and have a look. And remember, you can come back to this and review it later on if there are things that you miss. But do please, as questions in your mind pop up, just put them into the question box and we'll come back and have a look at those later on. So basically the outline of the agenda or the structure is to take a look at what's happening in the global project management trends and to try and look through the crystal glass, if you like, and say what's going to happen in the future. What do we see happening in the future? What do we mean by the project economy? Where are we seeing the gaps in the skills if the future work is what we think it's going to be? Aligning that to what we know to be the benefits of project management because we know why projects fail. And then what do we do about project management training? So they're basically the things that we're going to be covering off in the next few minutes. So let's take a look at the project management trends. I guess one of the things that we're seeing now is emergent economies, if I can put it that way. A huge a rise of an educated group of people coming through. And Africa is going to be one of these major growth areas. My own Rotary Club has got a young man who's got a program going in Madagascar where he's got a group of young people training in IT skills to be able to become web authors, and then each one of those people will support another 3 young people to come through a similar program. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that pyramidal type of self-help is going to work coming through that one. But again, with the advances in communication technology, that's what's happening. And the fact that we're speaking now, I'm in a time zone at 11:30, 11:35 Auckland time in New Zealand, and you're in a completely different time zone, apart from our lack of sleep. But I mean, the way in which we can have a 24-hour communication technology is, again, one of the facilitators of how we're going to get this powerhouse of talent on board. So they're ready to take on new challenges. As I mentioned, the work that I've been doing for the climate crisis management projects, the things that we're seeing, and I'm just touching on it in the Pacific Islands, but relocation of whole communities from coral atolls sitting in the middle of the Pacific to larger countries where there's a new landmass, and bringing with it all of those social problems that it brings, not just the dislocation of the people, but setting up their own communities or resettling their own communities and the culture that they are going to have to leave behind, because so much of it is connected to their land and their lifestyles that they've had in the past. So that's happening as well. So there's millions of projects happening around climate change. The other major aspect that's occurring at the present time is the advance of artificial intelligence. Where this is taking us is anybody's guess, but I rather liken it to some of the advances in technology that we've seen. We had the World Wide Webs starting, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and it was a boon to people. It was a voluntary organization. And then we got the dark side coming in. We got strange sorts of things happening. And barely a day goes by now without me getting some kind of phishing scheme or some kind of a scam coming through. So what started as a very altruistic system in the World Wide Web now is almost like a threat. Every time I open my mailbox, I'm constantly looking to see whether or not this is a real email that's coming through or whether it's somebody trying to get into my bank accounts. Is this what's going to happen with artificial intelligence? And that's one of the dangers that's on the top of people's minds in terms of, should governments be legislating to control artificial intelligence? Are we actually reading what the facts are when we're looking at our news feeds, or is this something that's been concocted by an artificial intelligence system? So again, we've got the recent cases of the British Brexit program and the referendum that took place there, the interference that took place, and similarly the setting up of these false websites and targeting people, particular groups of people with particular types of advertising, particularly during, allegedly through the US elections of President Trump. So there's all kinds of, I guess, what I call the dark side of AI, as well as the positive sides. So the other thing that's happening is what we're calling rampant protectionism. So whole countries, and heavens above, where are we now with COVID-19? I was just looking at a list. There's hardly a country that isn't impacted by this virus. And what are we doing? We're protecting ourselves. New Zealand is not only in a 4-week lockdown, but we're also in a 1-week state of national emergency. And this gives the government incredible power and to do that. New Zealanders who are still overseas are being told to stay where they are. There's no way that they can get back to New Zealand. And frankly, they would represent the biggest threat in terms of bringing back the virus to the country. We have a situation now where we've got 280 odd people who are confirmed with the virus. And in one school alone, there were 75 students right in the center of Auckland. So that is going to be a major, if you like, bubble of infection that we've got. Fortunately, I'm not in the center of Auckland and I'm out in a community of about 300 people. So we've got very strong protection going on at the moment. But so this protectionism is not just on our own communities, and we're beginning to understand what it means, but also across countries. And we've seen the rise of almost nationalism, if you like, in terms of popularist leaders in countries, talking about moving to the alt-right, as it were. America, make America great again and America first and things like that. Every country seems to be moving in that direction. So that's another environment. The other one is the global infrastructure gap. There isn't very much now. I was in Nepal in October and November, trekking at high altitude, and everybody, the porters who were getting their next job using cell phones. So the connectivity that we have in terms of IT infrastructure, not just the physical infrastructure that exists in countries. So everything is going to be driven by data that's available to us. And so all of this needs investment. And of course, as I mentioned before, I'm finding that we're getting more and more at a personal level, feeling more and more insecure in cyberspace because of the possibilities of these malevolent websites coming through, or these malevolent emails that are coming through. And I'm sure you're experiencing similar things too. So this whole area of cybersecurity is a growing area. So you combine cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, and there are two major areas of growth. So that's where we're seeing some of the things happening. So basically coming to the conclusion that the future of work is going to be, if you like, more fluid and more dynamic and goal-oriented than it has been in the past. And recent research indicates that 34% of the current workforce is what we call the millennials, those who've been born in the 21st century. And these young people are thinking differently to what we did when we were their age as well. Certainly when I left school, it was expected that we would almost get a lifetime job. Nowadays, 84% of them don't see themselves in the same job. 75% will probably want to and will be able to work remotely. One thing that COVID-19 has shown is that many organizations are not, do not have the resilience to be able to keep operating. A friend of mine runs an English teaching school, and they had prepared a disaster recovery plan for an earthquake disaster. And so having had that in place and tested it, as soon as the COVID-19 lockdown came in, they switched over to their disaster recovery plan, and all of their students are now back online. Their teachers are back online. They're all using Zoom to use their classes. So this is forcing us in a way, whether it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing. I find that social distancing, as we're calling it now, is not a great thing. I like to talk to people. I like the classroom environment. But COVID-19 is driving us back into I'm sitting in a computer nook as we speak, looking at a blank wall, driving us back into a computer screen and a keyboard. So is this how we're going to be operating into the future? So this connectivity that we have is just everywhere. That's what we mean by the word ubiquitous. It's just, we've just moved to a new home. And for the first week, we had no direct internet connections, and we had to go into a common space to connect to the internet. And honestly, it felt as though my right arm had been cut off. I mean, it was a really sense of grief and loss that I couldn't actually get onto the internet and find out what was going on. So they're saying that currently it's 42% of the global population. I think that, you know, it's probably just going to absolutely rocket from that we'll all be interconnected. So even looking at those figures in terms of smartphones, we're all connecting. Just before we started our webinar, a young doctor, friend of mine in Nepal, and I were connecting on my cell phone. So it's just amazing. And of course, with the advances in technology and the types of 5G that we're coming up with, that's incredible too. I remember the first remote system that I installed was a 300 board. I mean, good grief. We won't go back and tell you when that was. However, so what's happening is that we're getting remote jobs. We're getting more flexibility. Piali's working in India. I'm working in New Zealand. We're all in different time zones. We're you know, we are now just in this business of, do you shop online? I mean, our local supermarket, because of COVID-19, is enabled, and the few people that are out and about are delivering goods and services. We had 3 deliveries yesterday of parcels, the things that my wife had ordered. So shopping in person, is it going to survive, or are we just going to be all subjects of Amazon or any of those other big online services that are out there now? So things are changing. The high streets, as we know them, as they refer to them, the high street shopping is dying, and social interaction. In Britain, there's a complete outcry that they've got to keep the pubs open so that people can have some kind of socialization. So there's another factor, the disruption of artificial intelligence is contributing to this economic growth. So this is what the value is representing. 40% of the value is created by artificial intelligence analytical techniques. So it's a lot of money, 5.8 trillion. The US, to give you some idea of that, the US government has just passed a bill to allocate $2 trillion to the whole of the economy to combat COVID. So this gives you some idea of the size and what we refer to as the deep learning techniques of artificial intelligence. So other things that are going to happen: young people are more likely to choose a place to live rather than an occupation. And certainly, I don't think that just refers to young people. I mean, my wife and I have chosen to move from a central city environment into a rural environment just because we can work from home. She's currently managing 2 projects in the health sector in Auckland, and yet we're 180 kilometres away from Auckland. And she spent the day yesterday in conference calls and creating project plans. Yeah, because we're forced to not be there. But by the same token, this is a lifestyle place that we've chosen to be. And maybe we've joined Generation Z. Heavens, I don't know. Anyway, the machine-man interface is changing dramatically. And so some of the things that we can see happening is that we'll have virtual reality or augmented reality. Already we're doing face-to-face video conferencing calls. You and I, at the current stage, you're in a one-way street at the moment. I'm talking and you're hopefully listening and watching. But you probably experienced virtual reality systems as well. So that's another place, another area that we can go. Already we've got telemedicine working in virtual reality, where surgeons are remote to the operation that's taking place. And we've got these robotic forms of surgery taking place. So how is our workplace going to be changing? So what we refer to as the gig economy, they're saying that the people who are engaged in this, there were 42 million US workers in, just before 2000, and 20 years later, it's another 50% on top of that. 34% of the workforce have got a second job. 50 years ago, the economy was a single male, usually a male wage earner, and somebody who stayed at home and looked after children. These days, both parents are usually working and more than one job often. And we're saying that also that 1 in 3 of the millennials will not be in a full-time permanent job. I had a classic example recently of a young man who was working in a car dealership. It turned out that he was a digital designer working on his own business, but he needed to get some additional income. So he was selling motor vehicles during the day and basically doing his real work at night when he could get new clients. So there is this multiple tasking, if you like, or multiple occupations that the ubiquitous connectivity is enabling us to do. So what does it mean for your business? Well, certainly for my business, it means that I've been able to conduct training. My programs in the Pacific were what we call blended. We'd have a week together face-to-face, and then the next 6 weeks of the diploma program or the certification program, we were doing it remotely. And so the students had portals in which to submit assignments and so on. And more we're moving into, as we are now, into virtual spaces. So the other thing is that we're finding the world is becoming projectified, if you like. And Prashara, President and CEO of PMI, is one of these leading change agents. And the whole thing about the Project Management Institute is deriving business benefits through projects. And that's where we see the future of projects anyway. So it's all changing very, very fast. I got into project management, 25 years ago, where we had what we call the waterfall techniques, and it was very much structured, and we set up and clearly defined what the goals and objectives were of the project. And then we just got on with the job, and occasionally touched base with the end users, or we just finally delivered the solutions to the end users and they had to go through a training program. These days we're talking about customer-led projects. The customer is always with us, and we're using agile technologies to keep people in connections, and we prototype rapidly and start delivering in sprints of work as we're going. So we call this the project economy because we're delivering value as we're going along in these short sprints. So the agile methodology around projects has probably only been in vogue about 10 years, and it was fine for small project. It was fine for software development, but now it's becoming into enterprise areas. So now we have scaled agile, as we refer to it, scaled agile for enterprises, and that's a whole raft of it's a large amount of body of knowledge and processes and procedures that enable the agile methodologies of rapid development, rapid deployment, and constant communication with the customers to be taken into the large organizations. So this blending, if you like, of the needs of the millennial people, the needs of the global communication strategies is what we're seeing, so that people are able to define, successful business and successful careers. And disruption is what causes these changes. COVID-19 is a massive disruption. If you think of some of the, if you like, global pandemics that have occurred in recent times, we had SARS, we had MERS, and we had, I guess, swine flu was another one that cropped up. These haven't had the same impact, or haven't created the same sense of urgency. Who could have considered a month ago that basically the world's airlines would be shut down, international airlines? Russia has just announced that all international flights are going to be grounded. Qantas has cancelled all international flights. That's the Australian carrier. Air New Zealand is down to 5% of its capacity in terms of its international carrier. So this is an apocalyptic time for these organizations. Even 1 month's disruption out in an organization is going to be huge. So this is an opportunity in a way for us to see how agile we are, how flexible we can be in the way in which we manage projects. And so that bottom line says that organizations need to be nimble. I say that countries need to be nimble. I suppose we think that we're lucky that we're in a country of only 4.5 million people, and our cities are not large and complex. Well, I guess Auckland is only 1.5 million, and that's our largest city. So it's going to be, well, I hope that it's going to be easier for us to adapt. I mean, I cannot imagine what it would be like to be living in a country like China or India with these massive populations. I mean, what was Wuhan's, a city of 11 million people? And these are just masses of groups of humanity. So again, the organizations need to be what we call nimble, flexible, able to adjust, turn themselves around, recast themselves. And so the people that need to do that, the type of CEOs that we need and the leadership in organizations is going to change. So let's take a look at where we see the maturity in project management and what that means in terms of successful projects. And you can come back and have a look at these statistics, but basically there's a much higher degree of success rate in terms of projects and the delivery of the business benefits if there's a high level of maturity around project management in those organizations. And a high level of maturity means a structured approach, the creation of project management offices, the creation of program management as well as project management, and also at a business level, having portfolios of projects which are being guided by senior executives and general managers in organizations. As you can see, those with lower maturity have only half the success rate of completing things on time. And that is one of the most crucial aspects that we have in terms of this changing economy. We have to be agile, we have to be quick, we have to get things in and operational very rapidly. So have a look at some of those other factors there, but you can see, just casting your eye down there on the bar graphs, that a high level of maturity is beneficial to organizations. And so on the other side of that one, in terms of on the opposite side of successes, well, what causes these failures? And there's the big one, this change in organizations' priorities. Given that I've been doing a lot of teaching recently, my wife's being actively involved in 3 major projects at the moment. And because they're in the health sector, this COVID-19 has completely disrupted those and has changed the organization's priorities. They're clearly focused on safety and security of their staff and their clients or their patients. And so that's the major priority now, rather than getting these new systems in that seemed to be the priority previously. I mean, 2 weeks ago, it was all about transformational change, organizational change, restructuring, etc., etc. Now it's down to facing the business and getting on with in a crucial state. So that's one of the big ones. And then there's the traditional ones about not knowing what the requirements are. And one of the big factors that comes in is what you could call poor leadership, or at the sponsor level. So that's another area that has to do that one. But these are the 5 top causes of project failure. And time again, you see it. A change in a CEO comes in and the organization's objectives start to change. Projects are cancelled. It's classic in our democracies that every 3 years we have faced the opportunity of having a change in government, and each government has its own set of priorities, and many of the initiatives that have been underway previously, called projects, get cancelled by a new government coming in because it's not what they want to see happening. On the other hand, for those of us who are in the self-employed project management sphere, it provides us with an opportunity of a whole raft of new projects happening. So there's good and bad out of those ones, if you like. But there we go, poor communication. And so this whole thing about project management is about communications. So what are the skill gaps? What are we facing as we see them at the moment? So this is a recent survey from PMI. Excuse me. Where do they live? Manufacturing and construction. This is in the US alone. Utilities, information services, finance and insurance. So manufacturing and finance are the big ones. And that's where we can see the growth in terms of where we need to be at, and the types of work that we'll be doing. Artificial intelligence, when you think about it, the systems that we're putting into place. If you think about investing in the stock market, once upon a time, you had to have a stockbroker and you did it all bits on pieces of paper and you got a share certificate. These days, everything is online and you get an online share broker. You can get in and at the moment lose quite a lot of money. But on the other hand, there are traders out there who are making piles of money because of the volatility that's happening in the world stock markets at the present time. So where do we see the skill gaps? This is an interesting series of figures as well, again, from the PMI in 2017, but estimated then $208 billion in GDP in the US. They're saying that for every $1 billion that's spent on projects, each one runs at $122 million worth of losses. And they're saying that there's going to be, 2.2 million new project roles. This is professional roles, project management professionals by 2027. So when we're looking at that, that's only basically 6 years' time. So what are we seeing in terms of the opportunities. If you want a growth industry, if you want a growth profession, it's project management, growing by 33%. I don't know of any other profession that's growing that fast. Possibly nursing and healthcare at the present time with these pandemics on. But I mean, this is only short term. We hope it's only short term. And so we're saying there's, on average, a growth of 2.2 million new projects oriented roles to be filled every year. So thinking back to what we were saying before, with these emerging economies and these emerging talents from Africa, India, China, these major powerhouses of people who are coming through, highly educated and able to skill up, they're the people who are going to be looking for these jobs and looking for the opportunities. And already we know that major international organizations are using call centers in multiple different countries to have this sort of follow the sun type of ability to manage their businesses. And this workforce that we're going to be having is going to be looking for opportunities. So we've said AI is one of those ones, and connectivity is another. So one of the things is to look at the sponsorship of projects. And one of the key factors that causes project failure is lack of leadership or sponsorship of the projects. And so only 17% of the champions say that inadequate sponsor support is a primary cause of their failure, because they are a mature organization and they understand the need of it. Whereas 41% of those who don't have a mature project management approach are finding this to be failure. So that's one. The other one is the fact that in organizations which do not have a high degree of project management maturity, the requirements are not well understood. And so there's constant changes to what is actually happening, not just to the priorities and the objectives of the organization itself, but in terms of how the project's being developed. And so there's an interesting figure down there that says, as the complexity of the project increases, you're going to find that there's a high degree of scope change involved in them. So from 35% in 2013 to 41% in 2019 is the degree of complexity. So more and more we're seeing that we need to have professional people trained in project management. So the other one, two things, is in terms of the maturity of organization. So we're talking this about mature delivery. Okay, and it's saying that 87% of the champion organizations who have developed a project management culture in their organization are successful. In other words, they've got a high value delivery, whereas only 5% of those who don't have the maturity in project management. So one of the things that we find is that 90% of the people who are in mature organizations say that training is one of the foundational grounds. And frankly, to me, that's an absolute no-brainer. It's obvious that we need to have that one. And what they're saying here is that project success, if we say, again, with these mature organizations, and if you're in project management, you understand the triple constraints of on time, on budget, and according to the specifications, or meeting the scope. So there we have them, meeting the goals within the budget and on time. And again, always or often, these mature organizations are hitting their targets, 73%, 63%, and 59%, compared to those which don't have a mature structure. So looking at it again, another slice of this one is to say, well, in these champion organizations, how do we compare them? And these are some of the aspects of training, ongoing project management training, formal process to develop a competency. The Project Management Institute has a project management competency development framework. It also has in educational institutions, it accredits universities and teaching institutions with the PMI, if you like, stamp of approval. Organizations need to have formal knowledge transfers. Because of this change, we need to factor in that there's a handover process, and there needs to be some way of capturing what the processes are before people change into their jobs. So the prioritization of project management, technical skills, prioritization of leadership skills, again, this feeds back into this whole communication things. More and more, we're saying that project management is about inspiring people and leadership. And so if our project managers have no people skills, we're going to have a real problem. So again, one of the priorities that we have in upskilling our project managers, they could be technically brilliant, but they do need to have these people skills, even if we are working remotely from home. So understanding business too is a major factor for project managers. We just don't have to be technical experts in our own field, but we need to understand what business goals are, what return on investments are, what value of investments are, etc., etc. So that's a brief overview, and you know what you can do about filling the skills gap. Talk to Knowledge Hut.